The United States was a larger economy than everyone else in the world put together by all meaningful measures. But year by year by year, as the United States basically encouraged everyone else to grow, we used our military capacity and our access to our market to underwrite the entire alliance. You do that for 75 years, and collectively the rest of the world got powerful, and more powerful economically, to the point that the United States, even if it wanted to continue de facto subsidizing everything, couldn't. There's a military aspect. Post-Soviet period, we changed the way our Navy works. We concentrated all of our power in the supercarriers. We don't have a lot of destroyers anymore. We couldn't patrol the global oceans now, even if we wanted to. And part of it is demographic. After 75 years of industrialization and urbanization, the very population structure of the world changed. And in most of the world now, especially in the advanced world, there are more people in their 60s than their 50s than their 40s than their 30s than their 20s than their teens. And we now have such a top-heavy demographic that's full of people who produce, who are now on the verge of retirement, that there aren't enough people to sell to. The U.S. market is really the only one of size that still has a lot of young people. All those millennials that we keep maligning, they've got something going for them that their cohorts around the world don't. They exist. And there's no longer sufficient consumption on a global basis to support the productive capacity that's out there. So approach this strategically and militarily, or approach it demographically and economically. It doesn't have much time left. We go through phases where we're open and where we're close to migration. We're obviously in a more nativist period right now. The problem is that our electoral system strongly encourages big tent parties because we're first past the post. So you vote for a person rather than a party. So our parties tend to be weak, and that means they have to have as many factions within them in order to win office. Well, those factions move around based on issues in demographics and economics and geopolitics. And in the last 30 years, we've had a lot of change. The rise of globalization, the fall of globalization, the rise of China, the fall of China, the Ukraine war now, the information revolution. Makes sense that the factions are going to move around and we're going to treat our politics different. Well, the faction right now is in the middle of a tug of war between the two parties is organized labor. And the issue that they care about the most is immigration. So no one at the national level for either party is going to breathe a word about immigration reform until such time as we know where organized labor lands. So we've got this wonderful opportunity right now to open the doors and bring in just scads of skilled labor from the world over. And we are incapable of doing that right now. And I would guess that we won't be capable of having that conversation at a national level until 2028. And unfortunately, that's when a lot of this damage will already be felt by. In the past, our immigration policy was to pretend that we didn't have an immigration policy, but have a de facto open border to welcome in Mexicans. But Mexico started industrializing very seriously 30 years ago with the NAFTA Accords, and the birth rate halved as everybody moved into the towns to take the industrial jobs. So there's no longer a volume of Mexicans to come north, and then CAFTA was adopted 5 years later. So the Central American wave we're currently experiencing only has a few more years to run before that is gone too, and then everyone else that might come to the United States can't walk. They have to be on a ship or fly, which means they have to come from the Eastern Hemisphere, and that has to be a stated, firm national policy, and that requires Congress. There are a lot of countries out there that have followed different demographic patterns. I mean, everybody has started living longer and everyone has had a lower birth rate, but there's a lot of variation within the theme. The Mexicans didn't start going through this transition until the 90s. The Germans started it before World War II. Some did it slow, some did it fast. I don't think there's much of a paradox here because unless we did it as a planet all at the same rate, it's really hard to draw an ideological argument as to how we might have done it different or better. Problem is that once the birth rate started to drop, with like half a dozen exceptions globally, none of them ever picked up. You urbanize, you have fewer kids. There are very few exceptions to that trend. The prominent one is in the United States where we had the suburbs. Suburbs in the United States mean something different than suburbs in most other countries. In most other countries, the suburbs are slums. Here, single-family homes rule. And as if you have a yard, you can have more kids. So there's a cultural and a geographic element here that I think a lot of the ideologies that debate the consumption issue miss. And that's one of the reasons why the United States is actually reasonably well positioned here. I mean, like I said, the millennials exist. There isn't the equivalent of the millennials in Britain or in Germany or in Italy or Korea or Japan or China. And for the next 40 years, that is going to make all the difference. Well, agriculture, manufacturing, those are ones that I think most people understand the concept that you can only do something good, certain things in certain places, that there's concentrations of activity. So if you change the balance of the game, where you do that moves around. So for example, in the agricultural sector, a lot of the fertilizer production comes from the former Soviet world. That's in the process of falling offline. So if you have a soil type like in Brazil that just requires more fertilizer in order to grow anything, you're in trouble. I think that plays to people's mental bandwidth. I think the more important issues are the things that kind of operate under the hood that we don't necessarily think of every day because we assume that there's no problem. Transport's a great example. The concept of being able to move anything at scale anywhere in the world at a very low cost, reliably, with no security cost whatsoever, historically speaking, that is a laughable concept, but it's indelibly woven into how we think of the world today. I mean, you only have to go back a century and a half to get to a period when it was cheaper to move things from London to Massachusetts as opposed to moving them from Massachusetts to New York on a road. And we're moving into a world where international transport is not going to be safe. And in that sort of a world, everything about our current manufacturing, energy, agriculture, everything else breaks down. And transport becomes a local and a regional concern instead of a national one. And that forces a complete reimagining of how the world works. People forget that oil and natural gas are the internationally traded fossil fuels, the ones that are relatively low carbon. What we're seeing Europe doing is going in mass back to wood and coal. In fact, about 70% of the electricity that was generated in Germany this last month was coal and lignite. And we think of wood as a supplement, but it is as carbon intensive as a lignite if you're burning it for either power or heat. And we are seeing the Europeans go to that at a pace that we have not seen since the dawn of the early industrial age, when people were making charcoal en masse. The Germans have become so addicted to inexpensive, reliable natural gas supplies out of Europe or out of Russia that they base their entire economic system on it. So the natural gas doesn't just provide them with power. It's the base material for the entire petrochemical sector. And then that petrochem stuff is, for the most part, net exported. It's the base of their entire manufacturing model. Well, without the natural gas, and it's not coming back, the infrastructure's been destroyed, and some of the backup stuff all go through the conflict zone. So, it's not coming back at all. And even if they bring it in an LNG form, it'll be 6 times the cost of the old stuff. So what you're looking at is not just a collapse of their electricity sector and their petrochemical sector, but the entire German industrial model is going to be gone within 2 years. And that takes with it Belgium, the Netherlands, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, and Austria. Whenever the Germans get nervous about economics and energy, shit gets real in Europe really fast. I'm not saying they're going to march on Moscow, but for Germany to survive as a modern economy, it will have to have a radical political shift. That rarely goes well.